Hello and welcome to a new episode of Tell Muses, a podcast by storytellers, with storytellers, for storytellers, and for anyone interested in stories. This is Despina Rio from Greece with my friend Simona Stambazi from Italy. And today we have with us a very special lady we have been waiting for a long time to talk to. And our guest today, Hearscrow, is in the US. Where exactly?
Can you picture a map of the United States in your mind? Go into the farthest northeast corner.
Maine?
Okay, go to Maine and go a little bit left and you're in New Hampshire, and a little more and you're in Vermont.
Vermont. So it's next to the border, the Canadian border, is it?
Yes, you can go from here straight into Canada.
Our friend Hearscrow lives in a lovely wooden hut, like the wise woman she is.
There are no walls. What you're seeing behind me is what we call a partition, like to separate the kitchen from the bathroom, which is always a good idea. But it doesn't go all the way up to the ceiling so that spirit can move around the house without any interruption.
Wow.
So we smudge fairly often to make sure that when somebody enters the house, that they don't bring anything with them and they don't leave with anything they don't want.
That's awesome. They're so smart, these people. So, for people who do not know you, can you tell us a little bit about who is Hearscrow?
It would be a very long, very interesting story. So I'm right at this moment, in this place and this time. I am a woman of 74 winters. I am married to a man that I was not smart enough to dream of. I was doing some coaching, and then we were doing some exchange of information. And then it occurred to us that something else seems to be going on here that was no part of the original plan. I said to him, I am tired. I've run out of gas. I can't take care of anybody else. And his answer was, and he never took a breath, he said, suppose I took care of you. I've been a caregiver all my life. So I didn't even answer him because I'm thinking, what would that look like? How would that work? I'm going to marry him. So that is the end of a long and lovely story, which hopefully you'll get to hear one of the days that I tell. He is deeply involved with music, which made me involved with music. All my life, I wanted to sing. It was my wish. I was told by everybody that I couldn't sing, that I just didn't have it. And I didn't until one day we were singing together. I was working on a song I really loved by Cone. And he said, okay, we're going to go through it again. Now, we've been working on it for a month. And he starts playing. And I said, excuse me, but I seem to be singing alone. He said, that is correct. And I said, why am I singing alone? He said, because you can. And he was right. He had little by little taught me. He had improved my hearing the notes correctly. He had worked very hard, and that was 7, 8 years ago. He has now started 4 singing and guitar groups at the senior centers. And he and I volunteer with 2 other women. And we go once a month to a senior center and do an hour's worth of songs. And we do them with the audience in mind. So the newest thing we've done is a series from the 60s.
I didn't even know that Hearscrow was also a singer. I'm just finding out. What I know so far is that Hearscrow is a storyteller.
That's what I was born with. The other I've had to work really hard to. I've worked on my storytelling because I told stories for 30 years. I did it as a volunteer. And one day, one of the other storytellers called me up, who was older than I am, much more experienced. He said to me, "What's this I hear about? What are you charging?" Because at that point, I was only going around to powwows and women's circles and the work that I do spiritually. Mm. And he said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You need to start, and you don't need to be big, but you need to start having a minimum that you tell everybody who says we would like you to tell." He said, "I don't care what event it is. First of all, in this culture, they equate quality with money. And so you're telling them you're not worth what they value."
I see.
I also negotiate with people. If somebody's working off a grant, not so much. But if it's a library that has limited funds, they're getting stories out too. It's not the oral tradition, but they are getting stories into the hands of children. So I'll cut them more slack. That's the business end of things. I tell stories because I was born with stories. My mother was an English professor and became a realtor when I was very young in real estate. Oh. But when she was younger, when I would ask my mother, "How do you spell whatever?" she'd say, "Go look it up in the dictionary." Now I'm 4 and I'm trying to write a note to my grandma. And she wants me to go over and take a dictionary that's about 4 inches thick off the shelf and find the word. And I'd say, "What does it begin with?" And she says, "Well, look it up." I said, "I can't look it up if I don't know what it begins with." And that's the woman who raised me. Pretty much sums up our relationship. But I learned a lot of words. I have a fairly extensive, not huge, but I have a good vocabulary, which helps me enliven the oral stories. I can make the woman tall, or I can make her, she was of such a height she could look down at the top of the pine trees.
Nice.
And I've just said the same thing. Because of the vocabulary, it's very helpful, particularly with working with young people. Because those are words, they then immediately have this image in their mind that they've never had there before, because they never thought of looking down at a pine tree. You look up at a pine tree.
Yeah, you're right.
That's been a lot of value. One of the reasons that I really can't tell very well to people who don't have at least some English, because I am limited. In this country, we are not well educated in the languages of the world, which we should be. We're not in charge of it. We're just a part of it.
Hearscrow, since you're telling us about who you are, I met you about a year ago, I think.
Okay, that is you.
Yeah, the title of the workshop was "What's in a Name?" And one thing that I was starstruck by what you told us during that workshop was the history of your name, because it's not like a conventional name in the sense of American names. I wanted to ask you if you could tell us about the history of your name, Despina. Maybe you don't know the history of Hearscrow's name.
I don't, and
Sure.
I'm interested in finding out more.
I do have an American name. When I was born, I was supposed to be a boy. My father's name was Claude Jack Hazard. So I was born, much to my mother's disappointment, I was named Claudia Jane Hazard. When I came of age and went through my rites of passage, I was given a name by the head of the Wampanoag band in a sonnet. I had told him a story of my trip to Grand Canyon. I'm sitting on the edge of the north rim of the Grand Canyon. My legs are hanging over the edge. And I'm just looking at Mother everywhere, down, up, behind me, under me. And a crow flew up from the floor of the Grand Canyon vertically. He came up in front of me, and I now know she came up in front of me, over the top of my head, went over the ledge and down. And I thought, now that's not normal. Okay, I'm supposed to do something here. So I got up and I walked over. I saw her standing on a lower ledge. And I sat down. I said, Wanimunkan, and which is good day. Welcome, Wanigan. She immediately looked up at me and then faced her whole body towards me. And she started talking. I could hear her only in her language with my ears, but I knew every word that she said. The biggest thing was that I should stop standing towards the top of the Grand Canyon and looking down on it. I should go down in and look up. At that point, a larger crow came over and started squawking at her. Ha, ha, ha. Well, she started giving him what for. And what she was saying was, I'm perfectly fine. I'm having a conversation. Would you please leave? And he didn't look happy, but he turned around and he left. And we finished our conversation because I had something to say at that point. I said, you are asking a big thing of a very little person, but I will do as you have instructed. And I will carry you for the rest of my days. And with that, she flew off. I got up. I went over to the guy that I was traveling with. I was on business, and I said to him, we got to take an afternoon and go to the Grand Canyon. I've never been there. I said, I need to walk down into the Grand Canyon. He looked at me. He said, I've been here before. You don't mean all the way down. I said, no, but I need to go down where I can be inside the mother. Well, we went down the Bright Angel Trail. We were both in our 50s then, I guess. I walked by an alcove. I don't know all the religions, but I do know the Catholics have little alcoves with statues of the saints. That's exactly what it was. It was a small cutout, and it was quite large this way. It was very tall. And so I had no problem. I said to him, I think we're here. I said, I'm going to go in there. And he went, okay. And he knew nothing about the native world, the native language, our traditions, the role of a warrior. But he stood in front of me, blocking the entrance to the alcove, and took his two hands behind his back, with each hand holding the other wrist, which is a warrior stance, when he is not planning to fight, but is prepared. That's how he will hold his hands. And it's called standing picket, P-I-C-K-E-T. And it is what our warriors in the Northeast did. And these were only certain men, but the men who stood picket stood outside the village, would often sleep there at night. At the first warning of something that was wrong, something that didn't look right, smell right on the outskirts, there was a call that was given. All the other men on picket would know to go into a stance to be prepared to defend the village. And he stood like that with his feet apart, as if he could move very quickly. And I'm standing there looking at him going, oh my heavens, it's contagious. So sure enough, I turned my back on him and I put my hands on the walls. I'm not part of the new age. A lot of the new age is old stuff that has been turned around to suit other people. And that's unfortunate because there's so much reality in the traditional ways. But I felt the life. I have no idea how long I was in there. I haven't seen him in years. I should call him and ask him if he remembers, because I had no concept of time. The last thing that I heard, and I knew it was time for me to go back out, I didn't hear. I knew how old the feminine energy was. All I had to do was look around me. And there it was. The water had come through the rock. I have a very small stream on my property. You can see it from my bedroom. One of my favorite expressions is water always wins. If you put rocks in a stream and leave them long enough, there will be no more rocks in the stream because the water will wear them down. If you light a fire and throw water on top of it, it goes out. In the wind can take the fire any place it wants to, and it still burns. And you've heard, I'm sure, when there have been big fires anywhere on the planet, how difficult it is to harness the fire so that it can be put out. And so that's what I learned in the Grand Canyon. When I came home, I talked to my late husband, who was also Native, and he said, "So what are you going to do about it?" I said, "I was thinking I ought to go see the old guy." He said, "You mean Windsong?" I said, "Yes, I want to go see Windsong." He said, "That's not a bad idea." And we called him up and we went to see him. And I told the story sitting in his kitchen, just the way I did now. And he said, "Ah, that's your name." And I said, "Beg pardon?" He said, "Your name in English is Hearscrow. In Narragansett, it means she who hears it, the crow." He did the ceremony. We did it privately. We did it with my husband and his wife. Then I went to court and I had my name legally changed. I wanted it changed just to Hearscrow, but they said they couldn't do that because everything I would ever sign or try to get a passport or a driver's license, they would list it as Crow, comma, Mrs. Hears.
They would split it in two. Oh, God, it doesn't make sense that way.
No, it's two words. I write it as one word.
Yeah.
When I do a check and everything, so I don't have to go through all their stuff, because that's their stuff. That's not my stuff. Then years later, when I was in my 50s, I was asked to be a speaker at a peace elders gathering. And it was my first time, so I was like, okay. But I said yes, because that's not something you say no to, as there is a chance you may never be asked again by anybody. There was an older woman there. Her name at the time was Eagle Woman. It changed later on when she was working on saving her late husband's life. Her name changed. And that is not unusual during what we would call big medicine. And she sacrificed her name in hopes of receiving the medicine for him. But she went before I did, and she walked around that circle like she owned it. And I'm sitting there like, that's one, a woman. She was not very tall. She was politely full-figured. She wasn't fat, but she was very full-figured. Every time she came around, she saw me staring at her. I saw her. I knew exactly where she was, but I didn't make eye contact with her. And without going into a long thing, I already knew that she and I were going to connect somehow. And I didn't want that to distract me from what I was doing up there. So, but when I got up and was walking the circle, she's sitting there going, smiling, her shoulders going up and giggling to herself. And I thought, okay, I got it right. This is a connection. Not now. And so I walked around. I saw her several times at meals and whatever, and we saw one another and we nodded and we kept on moving. At the end of the gathering, I had a Hudson Bay blanket, which is the premium of native blankets and one of the oldest. manufactured. I had had it for the longest time. It had moth holes in it. It wasn't raggedy, but it was clearly old. And before we left, I went to her where she was staying, the little cabin they had put her in, and I presented it to her. I said, when I put this blanket in the suitcase, my husband said, "What the heck are you doing? What are you going to do with that?" I said, "I don't know, but it's going in the suitcase." I took that out of the suitcase and I went to her cabin and I handed it to her. I said, "I have a gift for you." I was taught when I first began to learn that it is everyone's responsibility to see that the elders are warm and safe, that they have firewood outside their door, and that they have food put aside and brought by hunters to them to get them through the winter. And she took it, and her eyes were glassy. And she took it and held it. Her roommate was there, her friend. None of us moved. None of us said anything. She took it and put it on the bed. And then she took a necklace off her neck. She had two necklaces. One was smaller than the others. And she told me the story of the black snake that she had picked, who was almost dead in the road. And she took it back to her house and placed him on a tree that was right above her little spring, so that if he was meant to live, he could. And if he was meant to go, he would be comfortable and cared for until he left. Let's flash forward like 12 years. My mother looks at me. I'm down at her cabin in Carolinas. We're sitting at the kitchen table and we're talking about this and that. And she said, "By the way, you're going to get a new name." Now, I thank God I didn't let this come out of my mouth. But I thought to myself, yeah, right, old woman. That's going to happen when hell freezes over. Because of the way I got this name and how important and powerful, and I don't mean like electric power, but how helpful it was. That name helped me help other people. I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "I don't suppose you know what it is." She said, "No." He said, "But you will when it comes." Well, she could tell that I was not buying it at all. After 12 years, she knew me very well. We sat at that table a lot. She taught me more about the women's medicine and the empowerment and the compassion and the viciousness that reside within the female spirit, and how to walk with that balance. I'll say you have seen these in the past. I wear a white gold, what looks like a thin wedding band on each of my thumbs. And that is to remind me at all times, first of all, that I am a woman and that I am capable of being compassionate, of spreading healing and compassion. And I can also be down in the dirt and nasty. And the choice is mine. Every minute out of every day, how I want to treat other people. I told her 3 years later. Of course, I've been down there several times since, whatever. I said, "I know my name." She said, "Come here." No, we're 16 hours apart. So my husband and I got in the car and drove down the gentleman I'm married to now, Mechanock. It's Munanshesh Mechanock, which means "go slowly, turtle," because he has a very hard shell, but a very soft underbelly. And when he gets an idea in his head, he may sit for a week thinking about it. But once it all comes together, he's off like a shot. And he can sit working on something for hours and hours and days and weeks until it is completed to his satisfaction. I am the one who gave him his name.
Oh.
I didn't do a ceremony. I literally said, whoa, 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 slow down. Because I had called him Turtle from the beginning because the tough back and the soft underbelly were always there. So he and I drove down, and he went off and went into the mountains and the streams and stuff. And she and I sat at the kitchen table, and she said, okay, what is your new name? I said, I don't think I could or should let go of the name that was given to me. But I also know that my name is Hollow Bone. Her head just bobbed up down, and she said, that's a really good name. And so my full name is Papakiskan Natawal Kaukantua. The hollow bone. She hears it, the crow. Try putting that on a Visa card.
Indeed. I can imagine the bureaucracy. The bureaucrats will just blow minds.
That's why we can't be enculturated. That's why we cannot become one culture.
Yeah.
And they realized that in the beginning. One of us was ready to make a middle ground. It wasn't going to happen. And now it is happening. There are small groups who are coming together. I have Jewish people that do the lodge every time we do one. I've had 2 Buddhists. I have had several people who are bisexual. I don't think I've had anybody trans yet, but I've had most of the different ways that people choose to see themselves or to celebrate in the lodge. And they're welcome. There's always a place. They must follow our traditions. But it's not uncommon for me to ask one of them is, would you sing one of your songs to us and tell us what it's about? That's very common that I will pick at least one person to sing from their heart and where their heart grows from. You said you had a question?
Oh, I have many questions. I need to pick. I do know that you live in a community, right? That's a native community, because you said you visited the elders and you go to powwows, and so that means that people are close. Is that right?
No.
No?
We are spread very far apart.
Ah.
This has the potential of becoming a living community. But right now we are a community of spirit, and we live in many different places. There's 2 or 3 of the people that I speak to every week.
I see.
Momo in Europe and I talk on a regular basis because she and I are part of a different kind of community. We also have some very important things in common. So I don't believe that only blood makes family.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she and I do not share blood, but she is as much a sister as if we had had the same mother. Because of this one thing that is such a challenge to each of us in our individual lives, that when we come together, there's like this huge turmoil of support that just rolls back and forth between us. I have one gentleman who is very large and wears long skirts. He is heterosexual. Mm-hmm. He said skirts are more comfortable.
Yeah, he's right.
You know, I wanted to say to him, and easier to go to the woods in. But anyway, he laughed. He's part of our community.
I know you do have a very diverse, multicultural community, and you connect with people of all different backgrounds, all walks of life. I mean, the connection you do is mental and sentimental, and it's different. But my question addressed the native community and how well connected you are there.
I was connected when I lived in Connecticut much more than I am up here. I was on the board of the Mount Kearsarge Indian Museum for 7 years. I became close to a woman who would be the clan mother if the clan mother system still existed. Every once in a while, I'll give her a call. She goes, "Hi." And I go, "Hi." She says, "Oh, it's you. What's going on?" And she has a position in her tribe, the Abenaki, who has many contacts. She is an artist. She's a teacher. She's a grandmother at the very least. She started the Abenaki Artist Association so that her people could get their work out onto the internet and be able to make a living out of what their parents and grandparents had taught them. The US government made a Bureau of Indian Affairs a couple hundred years ago. They give you a card that says you're an Indian. I don't have one of those because we are the only segment of the population in the United States who has to prove what we are. And I won't do it. I won't pay the money for the genealogy. And it's very expensive to trace native stuff. There's no point to it. I don't need money to feed my children. I've already been to college. The only reason would be so that I could say, I got a card. I find that non-motivational.
You did not get a useless card. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I saw a few months earlier that you did some work with Jim Brule. Is that right? Do you still collaborate?
Oh, yeah. We've got a couple things on the burner right now. And we just finished one last week.
Would you like to tell us? In case people are interested in finding out more about you, you know?
It started out by him inviting me to be one of the many people that he had on, it was once a week, he had on Diving Deeply, which you can still find copies of. And he asked me if I would do a Diving Deeply. And I said, sure. What are you looking for? And he said, the one thing that you need to do. Okay. And I knew exactly what it was because I have one story that I'd never told. I found it over 30 years ago. It is a very sacred story by a very doubtful author. The man who put it down didn't have the right or the privilege to do it. Was actually, I think it was the Chippewa who took him to court because he put things in that book about their tribe and they'd never met him. So he's a questionable author. But the story he wrote is old and true, and it's called The Jumping Mouse. I talked about it in the Diving Deeply, about why it was important, but I did not tell the story. I have told the story once, and I have given it to one other person in Europe to tell, because we worked together for a year to understand why the mouse ran under this bush. Why isn't it just like a holly bush? Why this bush? And what it means to the people. All of that was melded in together, but I was not comfortable yet telling the story. He had already started the Transformational School of Storytelling, but he was changing. He'd always done it himself and then had guest visitors come in and talk to the people. And he decided that he wanted a staff that year. It was myself, Maya Bumbarak, and Valentina Ortiz. Well, if that wasn't a ride, we had every extreme possible mixed in and the most interesting group of people. And it was a 2-year course. So I did that for 2 years. And then he decided that he needed to do something more with other work that he'd been called to do. He is a death doula, and he is still a transformational storyteller. And what he and I did was we were hosts for Oars in the Water, the healing
right.
art stories.
Yes.
So we each told the story. He told a Hebrew story, a Jewish story, and I told a native story. And they were virtually identical.
Wow.
Except he had a rabbi, I had a medicine man.
Yeah.
It was about how important the story is, because each of them are trying to help the people and they keep getting stopped. And both of them have almost the same line in them. When they come back to the people, they tell them that I couldn't get across the river. I couldn't remember where the river was shallow. I walked and walked and walked. I couldn't then another time. I remembered the supplication, couldn't remember the song. Now, this is over generations, which is why he can't remember. Every time he comes back, they're waiting for him, and they give him the best seat next to the fire. And he tells them what happened, apologizes that he didn't remember things or wasn't told certain things. The last line is, but the people heard the story and their troubles were relieved. And the story was identical.
We are having Jim Brule in a later episode who will be honored with his presence as well. So
Excellent.
lovely.
We're also hoping to do something at Sharing the Fire. And then we have something else scheduled this summer.
Do you do anything online so that people could, attend on a global level, I mean?
Not right now.
Not right now.
Because all of these things are in process.
Yeah.
Until somebody says, yes, this day, this time. I don't think that would be fair.
Excellent. So, my dear Hearscrow, this has been so interesting. So very interesting, Simona, right? And I loved it, every bit of it. Usually, what we do is we ask for a little bit of a story in the beginning and another little bit of story in the middle and maybe something to end it with in the end. But all of your talk to us today has been stories, one after another. But on that note, do you think, not the jumping mouse, obviously, but is there any kind of story you would like to share to finish this with?
I have two that I think you mentioned something about stars. I do have a moon story, but I also have a wonderful story. It is a new story written in the past couple of years, and I contacted the author with permission to tell the story because it is a modern story. But it is as traditional as it gets in its message. And if it's okay with you, I would like to do that one.
Please.
Please tell us.
There is a book published, and it's called Many Hands. It's about a little girl named Lily. Lily was sitting in the field all by herself. She'd been gathering sweet grass and just was tired under the sun, so she sat down for a little while, laid the sweet grass gently beside her. And as she did so, she looked up and saw, no, that can't be. It's not a firefly. It's a dragonfly. And the dragonfly came over and landed very gently right on her lower arm. And she looked at it, and it hopped up, flew around a little bit, and she didn't move. Came back and sat on her arm. Started to fly again. This time Lily got up and followed the dragonfly. And he went for quite some distance. She didn't know how far they could fly, but he went down to the little pond where she had been before, pulling sweetgrass and gathering it for the ceremony. She got almost to the edge of the little hill and looked down. And there was a woman who had already passed away. It was her grandmother standing in the pond, the one who taught her everything she knew about basket making. Her grandmother was a master. The grandmother looks up. The granddaughter's going, "Nokomis, is that you?" Nokomis is one of the words for grandmother. She said, "Yes, it's me. Come, come." She looked at her, and she was gathering sweetgrass. They spoke for a couple of minutes, back and forth. And she said, "I so miss making baskets with you." And she said, "I know, but you'll go on making baskets, and you won't forget me. I have a gift for you." And she reached down into the pond and pulled up a lotus flower. And she said, "Here for you." And as she opened her hands, there was a basket. It was made of ash splints, thin strips of the ash tree. And around the top of the basket and the edge was sweetgrass. But on the top was a beautiful pink lotus, as a water lily would be. And she took it and handed it to her granddaughter. And she said, "Remember, many hands make the basket." And she looked down and said, "Oh, grandmother, it's so..." And grandmother was gone. She looked down, and the flower was gone, and the basket was gone. But in her mind and in her heart, Lily had the basket. And her grandmother had taught her enough that she knew exactly how to make it. And she went running back to the house, picked up the new sweetgrass, and went back to the little room off the back of the house where she and her grandmother had made baskets. And she began to weave. And she wove the floor to begin with, so that there were pieces of ash splint making a circle, and then the sides. And ash splint went in and out to the sides. And then she took not only the ash splints, but she took the sweetgrass and braided and wove it into a perfect circle. And then she made the basket. She put it down in front of her, and then took little pieces of ash splint that had been dyed and put leaves and a flower on the top of the basket. She was so proud of herself. She looked at it. Is this not the most beautiful basket that's ever been made? Now, at 12, she hadn't seen that many baskets, but she sure did love that. She went running into the kitchen to her mother. Now, her mother is standing there in front of big pots, and she's taking strips of ash and dropping a few into that one, which is kind of a golden yellow. And then she would take some others and drop them into a light green. And she went up to her mother and, in the middle of her work, pushed the basket in front of her mother's face and said, look what I made, Mother." And she said, "Oh, that is a lovely basket, but I have a lot of work to do. I have to go to work." And she went back into dipping and stirring and dyeing the ash splints. Well, Lily wasn't too thrilled with that reaction. She was expecting a little more praise. But she turned back to where her grandparents were. They were sitting at the kitchen table. They had taken the sweetgrass that had been brought in earlier, and they're braiding it as they sit. And their hands look like they could leave the body and keep doing this. They were so perfectly timed, and every single braid was equal sized. And she put it in front of them. "Look what I have made." And they looked at it and said, "Oh, it's very pretty, but we have to go back to work." It takes many hands. And with that, Lily huffed out of the room. And she heard this axe sound. And she went over and, oh, there were her cousins. Her cousins were taking the bark off another ash tree and had sprinkled tobacco on it and prayed. And she went up to them and said, can you see the basket? Can you see this beautiful basket? They said, oh, that's very nice, but it takes many hands and we have work to do. Right. And she walks away. She goes down a little further and she hears the mallets smashing so that they can lift the splints off of the ash tree, which now has no bark. So they're on the inner bark and they can lift it up easily. And it's very thin, so it's pliable. And she said, see what I've done? See what I have made? And they said, oh, that's a nice basket. But it takes many hands. And she was like, oh, yeah, I know. You got work to do. And she left. She was starting to get a little bit annoyed. She went over and plopped down and said, I don't know what's the matter with everybody. Can't they see? I made this with my 2 hands. This is my basket. I made the basket. Same place I make all my baskets. And as she huffed, the dragonfly lit the flower on the basket. Looked at her. And she looked at the dragonfly and said, you're right. That's exactly what it still needs. And with that, the dragonfly flew off. She picked up her basket and ran back to the little cabin. And she sat down and she took some of the scraps of pink that her mother had dyed and put them all around into a beautiful blue, pink, and green dragonfly and rested it right on the flower. And then she went back down to the pond to thank the dragonfly and to thank grandmother and the coolness who had taught her all that she knows. And she said, I thank you both, Wanigan, Munwakanas. You were right, grandmother. Many hands make the basket. I will never forget. And she got up and walked carefully back to the house, leaving the dragonfly to dance among the sweetgrass.
That was so nice. It reminds me of my granny now.
Uh-huh.
That was a brilliant story. Thank you, Hearscrow.
I love the fact that it's such an old message. And it's in a very modern, she's wearing shorts when she goes down and runs into her grandmother. And her grandmother's got an apron that she's putting the sweetgrass in. So it's a very modern story. But it's very, very old because it's true. It takes many hands.
Well, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom with us today.
It's not mine. Remember, everything you hear from me, nothing comes from me. All of it comes through me.
Yeah, you're right. None of it comes from any of us, really. We're just channels.
That is correct. What you can't see is the line of grandmothers standing behind me.
Well, thank you, and the grandmothers behind you then.